Okay, so Romans chapter 13, and I believe you got up to verse 6 last week.
Yep.
And so tonight we're just going to be looking at two verses, 7 and 8. I wonder, Roger, would you like to read those for us? So it's Romans chapter 13, and verses 7 and 8, please.
Yeah. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another has fulfilled the law.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just those two verses, and verse 7 kind of picks off, doesn't it, from verses 1 to 6, regarding governmental authority. Those that are servants of God, even ministers of God for our good. And in verse 7, Paul says, render therefore. What is the therefore, as we've said before? Well, it's because of the foregoing, isn't it? That basically governments perform an important function. The state is needed for law and order. Therefore, providing that service, it makes sense, doesn't it, to render all their dues to those whom it is owed. Tribute, custom. So we're not just talking about, well, I'll only pay income tax, but I won't go so far as to pay, well, I don't know what it might be. I think you can order things, I believe, off the internet, and there is a way of ordering so that you don't pay the custom. You don't pay that import tax. Is that something that we think, well, that's just a small thing, I can shave that bit off, it really doesn't matter? Well, no, it all matters. We're to be faithful in small things as well as big things. And also, verse 7, fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour. Now that takes it one step further, doesn't it? I don't know about you, how do you feel about traffic wardens? Yeah. How do you feel about the police? Maybe you've had a bad experience in the past. At work, sometimes we joke about their sort of nicknames that are used, and the kind of attitude that people have towards them is one of utter contempt, of wholesale disrespect and disregard. Really, is that the way we're to act around servants of the state, government officials? Well, according to this, in verse 7, fear to whom fear. So that they are in a position that, to some extent, demands respect. And here we're commanded to respect them. Is that easy? Honour to whom honour. How do you feel about Customs and Excise, HMRC? Well, in fact, your money is going somewhere. Your money may not always be managed perfectly, and it never will really under this system. But to some extent, you could argue that God permits that, whilst at the same time allowing them to function in a capacity whereby law and order is maintained, and you can drive down the road, and by and large the road is surfaced. By and large the traffic lights are functioning. Yeah? Can you imagine if we didn't have traffic lights? I mean, I went on holiday for a bit of work and holiday to Bulgaria, and I drove from the capital, Sofia, to the Black Sea coast via a ski resort called Bansko. It was a very long journey. All I remember about that was the shocking state of the roads, of being on the highway and swerving out of a way of potholes and goodness knows what, mounds of tarmac that just were there. Who on earth had put them there, I don't know, but they were just there. And when we returned the hire car, it had something like 800 euros worth of damage, and we had 2 punctures on the way back. I wasn't used to that car. By the way, I wasn't the only driver.
Oh dear.
I wasn't used to that. Not that car. The state of the roads. So there is a lot actually that we take granted for. I mean, we're liable to some extent for our sewerage and our water supply in the home, but there's a great deal going on out there to keep our water clean and safe. All of this is going on, ticking over all the time. We live in an age of entitlement and of disregard to almost contempt, as I said earlier, for institutions that are actually serving a very good purpose. And so it's good to remind ourselves of that when the tax bill comes through, or when a brown buff envelope comes through the letterbox. We are very fortunate, aren't we, to be living in Great Britain. Great, I don't know about that so much. But of course that doesn't mean, and we're going to look at it in a moment, that it's always that easy to honour and to submit when the government of the day is not in support of your freedoms, particularly your religious freedoms. That's granted. Quite understand that whilst we live in the West and we can go out and we can preach to a pretty good degree, we can do that with freedom. There are other countries where that just cannot happen without there being fear of reprisal and fear of your own life. Now, what do we do when we're submitting to a government that is so oppressive? How do you get that balance right? I thought we'd look at Acts chapter 4 so that we get the narrative right. The intent of Paul's writing is not to say that we obey with blind obedience. This is about submission, but he's not advocating a sort of we do everything that we're told, however ridiculous and however ungodly. Acts chapter 4, 15 to 21 is a good example. Did I say Romans? Sorry. Acts.
No.
Oh, did it? Right. Oh, right. Acts chapter 4. I wonder what you make of this. You're probably familiar with it, but it is a good one. Remember back then in the first century there was a kind of a mix, a meld of the state and the religious authorities, okay? And here they are, the apostles, like Peter, and in verse 15, but when they had commanded them to go aside out of the council, they conferred among themselves. So here are these unlettered, unlearned, ignorant men who've been preaching. The council, I think that is the Sanhedrin, or Sanhedrin, however you know it, yeah. So verse 16, saying, what shall we do to these men? For that indeed a notable miracle hath been done by them is manifest to all them that dwell in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. But that it spread no further among the people, let us straightly threaten them, that they speak henceforth to no man in this name. And they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye, for we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. So, we've talked in the past about being radical. That is the radical option and the right one, to obey God's voice on this one, not man's. To hearken to him rather than men who would have us say nothing. And I think it's something to think about as you go about your life, even in employment. Just be careful, even if there are policies and procedures, that you are, in fact, in some instances, overlooking what could be an opportunity for God to speak to another soul through you. That's for something for you to judge for yourself, but can you see the danger if we allow this to shut our mouths completely all the time? I think to be fair, the person who is seeking the Lord, and if the Spirit's speaking to you about that, then what is more important, saving their soul from eternal judgment, or to share with them the life-saving gospel? I'll let you decide on that. But it's just that gradualism, isn't it? It's just that creeping. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't. And before long, it just feels like the secular state is putting a gag on your mouth. And we've succumbed to it, we've submitted to them, when in fact, look at the actions of the apostles. They were very straightforward. In fact, that was the next verse, Acts chapter 5. What did they do after having been charged, shut up basically? And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, did not we straitly command you that ye should not teach in this name? And behold, you filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. No messing about there, was there? We ought to obey God rather than men. And verse 42, and daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. They ceased not. We live in a post-Christian culture. We live in a secular state. And we have people in power whose ideology is secularism or secular humanism. Yeah? They're informing and writing and producing the laws and the policies and the guidance that's shaping society, that's creating the ethos of major institutions. And if ever you've studied sociology, you'll find that there's something called structural functionalism. And it's the idea that whilst we're social actors, in fact, we're basically puppets on the string of the institutions that are shaping us. The argument goes that our freedom is an illusion, that in fact we are a product of our culture and our institutions influencing us, either for good or for bad. Now, I don't hold to that position totally, of course, but there's something to be said for that theory. And in some instances, it's right that we stand up and say, I obey God, rather than men. But we do it with honour and respect, not obnoxious about it. You know, bring it on, yeah, let's have a fight with the authorities, yeah, let's see if I can rile the police constable. That's not what we're about. Okay, so verse 8, we're back to the chapter. Romans 13 verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. What a magnificent verse that is. Jesus tells us that the law hangs, does it not, on those two simple commandments. Love God and love your neighbour. And whilst we're rendering and paying off our dues, our taxes, our custom, here we are forever indebted to our neighbour, to our family, to the work colleague, to the enemy, the neighbour from hell, or the worker, I've said in the past, who just rubs you up the wrong way, or even the relative who does the same. Every morning we get up, we become conscious, hopefully, and we are indebted. We're in debt to that person. Imagine that. Think of it. That there's an IOU note, and we have this necessity to show love because we're constantly in the other person's debt. When you think about it like that, how does that make you feel? If you're seeing people like that, can you see also how we might be different in our behaviours towards them? If this were money, if you could, see it tangibly, I owe him 10 grand or 20 grand or even just 100 quid. You're in debt to that person. Well, for starters, when you're in debt to somebody, often are, well, you should be pretty nice to them. I tend to find that, you know. But here we're talking about a love that extends forever, and it's always something that we have to pay out every day. So you get up and you think, oh, I'm seeing so and so today. Rather than framing it like that, why not reframe it as, well, I owe them love today. No, I'm going to see so and so, and this is going to be a nightmare. Oh, and you know, last time we talked, it was so, and you know, they really get on my nerves, and the way he slurps his tea. And no, I owe you love. How am I going to pay that debt today? How am I going to meet that need? How am I going to honour them? That's quite challenging, but it's absolutely necessary. It's crucial. It's what Christianity is all about. Galatians 6 verse 10. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. So, beginning especially with the household of faith, but good unto all men. As we therefore have opportunity. How often do we have opportunity? Well, we have opportunity all of the time, let's face it, do we not? It's always there. It's always there. You can see how family breakdown could quite easily be resolved if we just came to it with that viewpoint, with that focus, doing good at every opportunity. I'm in debt to you. How am I going to pay the debt back in terms of love? Let's go to John 13:35. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. Love is the key, love is the touchstone. If you want to find out whether it's real gold or fool's gold, you would run it across the touchstone. What is the hallmark? What really shows you to be a man or woman of God? It is love. That's why Paul then says it fulfills the law. What he's not is doing, I believe he's not doing, is abrogating the law, abrogating the need to be moral. We'll look at that next week. What he's saying by using the word fulfill is it completes, it sums up, it is to that end. That is the purpose of the law. The law is about love, and functioning in the law is futile without love. It must be fueled by the love of God and the love of neighbour. And in so doing, it's a strange thing how it functions, but if we start doing it, God blesses that, and we find that he births love in us. But sometimes we have to get our feet wet, as they say, and then God blesses. It's so important that this be the centre of our Christianity. And I say that because God is love. So God's the centre, but God is love. John 14 verse 15. If ye love me, keep my commandments. Not only keep my commandments, but if ye love me, comes from a heart of love. But a sign that you are in love with God and neighbour. And I use that not in the general sort of vernacular, common or garden sense. I mean love as in divine love. Then you will desire to keep those commandments. Verse 21. He that hath my commandments and keepeth them, he it is that loveth me. And he that loveth me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him, and will manifest myself to him. Look at that. There's a connection between commandments and keeping them, and experiencing the love of God. If you're truly wanting to do the Father's will, then his will is that you obey. Not you will obey like that, but you will obey. You know, because it's good. Psalmist talks about making the eyes shine. Have you ever read that? Yeah, there's a glow. Because the person is in a special place, the love of God. And the commandments aren't a burden, as John tells us in his first letter, but they're for our good. Like playing football, you know, there are some rules to the game. You can have the game of your life if you follow the rules and the, I don't know what they call the offside rule and so forth. 11 players on each side. I'm not a football whiz, but I know that if I were referee, it would be chaos, and I don't think that the players would enjoy their time, because I wasn't managing the game according to the rules. They're there, that structure is to our betterment, our goodwill, it's goodwill. John 14 verse 23, have we just read that? Verse 23 now, not read that one, have we?
No.
Jesus answered and said unto him, if a man loves me, he will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and will come unto him, and make our abode with him. Verse 24, he that loveth me not, keepeth not my sayings. And the word which ye hear is not mine, but the Father's which sent me. Loveth me not, you don't obey me, you don't keep my sayings. Loving, then you keep the words, verse 23. It's crucial, chapter 15 verse 10, because chapter 15 verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I've kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Jesus kept the law. He kept his Father's commandments, and so he remained in the love of God. It's the same for us. Feeling that there's something missing, feeling that the love of God isn't there for you, try looking at the moral law. Is there something you're not doing? Or is there something you're omitting? Chapter 15 again and verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. That sets the bar high, doesn't it? As I have loved you. Okay. Forever in debt. In the debt of love, and as verse 12 says, it's a love the way Jesus loved. Now, that is the difficult bit, isn't it? How can I love like God? Here we are, struggling with the flesh. And yet, we're commanded time and again to be loving as God loves. And we see it and we think, we know we want to be like that, we know that's the standard, but I just don't feel like I'm doing it, that I'm getting there. It's too high. It's too big. It's beyond me. Well, congratulations, it is beyond you. But don't give up. Don't think that somehow that other brother or sister, they're doing so good, but me, I just don't think I'll ever be like that, like Christ. In Andrew Murray's book, Full Blessing of Pentecost, and I believe obviously that this all comes from the Spirit, therefore I'm talking, although this is about the Spirit, it's about love as well, isn't it? Because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, so forth. He says it's necessary to say to oneself, I do not as yet have this blessing. He says that's a good start. He says you may perhaps put the question, why should it be necessary to cherish this conviction? The first is that there are many Christians who think they've already got the Holy Spirit, that all they require is to be more faithful in the endeavour to know and to obey. They think that they are already standing in God's grace and that they only need to make a better use of the life they possess. They imagine that they have all that is necessary for continued growth. He says, on the contrary, it is my deep conviction. Now, okay, this is quite blunt, but let me read it. Go for it, yeah. They imagine that they have all that is necessary for continued growth. On the contrary, it is my deep conviction that such souls are in a sickly state, and that they have need of a healing as divine and as effective as that which the blind and lame received from the Lord on earth. Accordingly, just as the first condition of my recovery from disease is the knowledge that I am sick, so it is absolutely necessary for them to discover and acknowledge that they do not live the life of Pentecost, that they do not walk in the fullness and the joy of the Spirit, that they do not possess the full blessing which is indispensable for them if they are to please God in everything. Once this first conviction is made thoroughly clear to them, they will be prepared for another consideration, namely, that they ought to acknowledge the guiltiness of their condition. They ought to see that if they have not yet rendered obedience to the command to be filled with the Spirit, this defect is to be ascribed to sluggishness and self-satisfaction and unbelief. They should be induced to acknowledge with shame that they have despised what God had prepared for them, when once the confession that they have not yet received the full blessing is deeply rooted in them, there will spring from it a stronger impulse to attain it. Take then this thought and let it work in you with power. No, it is true that I do not as yet have the blessing. That's strong stuff, isn't it? But I think what he's trying to say is self-satisfaction. It's so easy, isn't it, to think, I've got it, I'm alright, I just need to work on this, or I just need to do that. But no, the only way to be filled with God is to recognise how empty we are and the necessity to be empty in order to be filled fully by God. because it can't be anything else but God. And then once that recognition is made, he says, I must have this blessing at any cost. It's a possession of a pearl of great price. And the merchant, he sold everything, all that he had to have it. Is that the determination we have? Once we recognise how bereft we are, do we then seek it as a pearl of great value? And then in the next verse, in the next paragraph, further he says, express your decision in the presence of God with confidence and perseverance to have this blessing. Repeat it before your own conscience and say, I am a purchaser of the pearl of great price. I have offered everything to obtain the full blessing of Pentecost. I have said to God that I will have it. By this decision I abide. I will have it. And then he simply says, ask for it, and in faith believe that it will come. Don't, he says, expect there to be a sudden feeling, a sudden change, a sudden conversion of some description. No, he said, because God might well bring up in your heart things which are hindering you, things which you need to change, things that in fact over time he'll convict you of. And then he says, annihilate in the flame of his countenance of love. God is bent on you putting those issues aside. And that is sanctification, the process. But is it as fervent as that? Is it so deep that we should have the love of God in our hearts, shed abroad? Can we look in the mirror and really say we have the full blessing? It's a case of getting real with ourselves, of being honest with ourselves. And if you've got that conviction that you don't have it, actually that might well be a good sign, a good starting point. Because self-satisfaction is so easy to fall foul of, isn't it? To convince oneself, I'm okay. And we say this, of course, because it is a miracle to love the way we've described love this evening. It takes nothing but God. And so, what is the point of functioning as a Christian without it? You're void of what matters most and what is eternal, what won't be burned up as wood and hay and stuff and so forth. All of those things pointless without love. Lord, did we not? Lord, did we not? I never knew you. Love is the key.